Okay, good morning. 5-yard penalty, delay a game already, right? It's what? 5 minutes after. Oh, wow. Time lost at the beginning of symposium is time lost forever, just like a project. So good morning, I'm Jim Zott. I'm Director for the Project Management Program here at UT Dallas. It's my pleasure to be the first to welcome you here. My remarks will be brief. My predecessor, we're still hoping he shows up. He's stuck in traffic, but if not, we've got his remarks covered as well. Thanks for fighting the rain to get here on time. We've got a great program lined up. As you see, for those that have been here before, we're in a different location today. Our initial plan was to use this for our lunches, which is much nicer than being up in the classrooms like we had the last few years. But a strange thing happened on the way to the symposium this year. And they decided to put final exams for the summer semester on the weekend that we normally have our symposium. And so that pushed us a week later, which pushed us into orientation week. And so all the auditoriums are being tied up with orientations, and so we're here in the new ballroom for keynotes as well as for lunch. And my first reaction was, well, I go to lots of conferences, and they're in ballrooms at hotels, and so this should not be anything different than most of us are accustomed to. Other than those that remember how nice that auditorium next door is to listen to keynotes in. And Debbie tells me we have that reserved for next year, so we're set there. The one difference being is we'll be in May next year, end of May rather than in August. So most of the people we've talked to said that's a good thing, not being in the middle of the summertime. So hopefully we'll all see you back for that. And Debbie will have more to say about that in a few minutes. And speaking of disruptive leadership, it says I'm on. There we go. So, my commercial, as I said, I'm director for the project management program here at UT Dallas. It's an academic program mainly. So we offer a graduate certificate in project management, a Master of Science in Management Sciences, or if you go all the way, it's more credits, an MBA. And then we do a number of corporate things as well. And so we do more than just run the symposium. And so if you're interested in any of those things, by all means grab me or Debbie and Kathy. We'd be happy to talk with you about it. We have to have learning objectives. We're also a registered education provider of the Project Management Institute, and they like everything we do to have learning objectives in order for you to get PDUs. And we need to survey how well we're doing against these learning objectives. And so Debbie, you'll be talking about the post-symposium survey as well as the surveys we'll be doing for all the speakers. And those are built into your app, which she'll also be talking to you about. All kinds of new great innovations here this year. In terms of our sponsors, this is a joint effort. We've got David Pells from PM World. David is a PMI fellow. I haven't seen Susan yet this morning. There she is over there, Susan Kennedy, president of the Dallas PMI chapter, and her host of volunteers. We've got about 40 volunteers that work with us on this, and they're in the orange shirts. And the nice thing about being a volunteer is you get to come for free. Also, our presenters get to come for free. Not all symposia do that in the congresses. They expect you to buy a ticket and to donate a paper. Here, if you donate a paper, you get to come for free. And so I encourage you to think about submitting a paper, sharing your wisdom for next year. And of course, a lot of the Lions work through the year is done by our faculty and staff here, and Debbie Flynn, name change, our program manager, she's my right arm in running the program here, has been the program manager for this event for a number of years, but she's handed that baton off to Kathy Lovelace, who I don't see in the room. Oh, there she is in the back, giving us a good fair catch signal, you need to wave your hand from side to side. If you just do this, you can get tackled, and we're not going to be protected. Did I tell you I used to referee high school football? So we appreciate all of their efforts. Our founding director, Jim Joyner, normally is involved at the kickoff here and works as master of ceremonies. He's coming in from someplace out near Greenville and said traffic was going about 30 miles an hour on the interstate, and so hopefully he'll get to join us at some point in time. But we certainly couldn't do it without all the volunteers and all the people that submit their papers, and hopefully we'll have a great show here. So with that, I'm going to introduce Debbie and let her take it over and tell you the smokers the bad news about what's going on campus.
First, an important change we've had is the university is now a tobacco-free campus, which includes e-cigarettes or chewing tobacco. So you have to go off campus if you are a tobacco user. The network, the Wi-Fi is UTD guest. You should have a paper in your bags with the same information, so if you want to connect to the Wi-Fi, you can. And I just want to remind everyone if you could silence your phones just so we don't have interruptions. The main thing I'm here to talk about, again, same as last year, is our app. Last year was the first year we debuted the app, and we've made quite a few updates and changes to it, so hopefully it'll be even smoother than it was last year. If you haven't downloaded the app from the App Store or Google Play, I strongly urge you to. If you want us to claim PDUs for you, you need to record your attendance through the app. So I'll walk you through quickly how to do that. If you choose not to use the app, you will have to claim your PDUs yourself, which can be cumbersome because now with the change to the talent triangle, you have to claim every individual session, not just the symposium as a whole. So make sure you sign in and provide your PMI number, not your PMP number. When you log in to claim PDUs, you probably use your PMP number, but PMI requires us to use your PMI number. When you look at the schedule button, there's 3 different choices at the top. The first will list all of the sessions. And then if you click on the star button, that will add it to your favorites, which will be your individualized schedule. And then when you go into each presentation and mark it as attended, you can then go back and look at the ones that show as attended. The ones that show in your attended list will be the ones that PDUs will be claimed for you. So you'll want to double check that. So you can go, you can see the abstracts and bios either from the schedule, or you can click on presenters. And then down at the bottom is where you'll see mark as attended. That's what will trigger us claiming PDUs for you. In addition, this year we're asking everyone to do the surveys through the app. That way you can do it as you complete each session. So under the mark as attended, there's a leave feedback link. When you click on that, it'll take you, it's just 5 short questions, and you can leave comments if you'd like. Then at the end of the symposium, this year, instead of that big survey that I email you guys every year, this year we've integrated it into the app, and it's considerably shorter. So what we would like to do is have you complete the survey as soon as possible. Anyone who completes the survey by August 31st will be entered into a drawing for a free symposium attendance for next year. So if you'll please complete that. Also, I forgot to mention, on the speaker evaluations, if you do your speaker evaluations by Monday, we will also have a drawing for anyone who's completed all of those for a free attendance for next year. The door prizes that we draw every year, we will have the ticket numbers listed by the registration table, but we'll also post them on the app, so you can keep checking the door prize button. That's on the More tab down at the bottom. We have our business lounge also available this year. Again, it'll be that same 1.502, and that'll be in executive education. It's the first classroom when you walk through the glass doors. So again, our keynote, our lunches, and our networking reception will be here, and then everything else will be back over in the School of Management in the rooms there. The maps are also on the app, so if you're not sure where your track room session is, you can look at the maps. We'll be coming back here for our afternoon keynote, and then our networking reception will be held immediately following, right out here in the reception area. This is our big change for this year. Next year, we will be moving our symposium to May. And hopefully that'll help people who aren't on summer vacation with their families. So mark your calendar now. It's going to be May 17th and 18th. And like Jim said, we do already have the ATEC auditorium reserved for our keynotes, and then we'll have lunches here. Since we did a big change with the date this year, we're offering $100 off our regular early registration date or early registration fee. So if you register for the May symposium by August 31st, you'll get it at a rate of $375 instead of the $475 early registration rate. And you can do that through the app as well. And now is normally when I would hand it over to Jim Joyner, but since he's still stuck in traffic, I'll just go ahead and continue. You do have the schedule, a hard copy of the schedule in your bags, but if anything does change last minute, we will update the app, so you can keep checking that as well. And that's it. I think we're ready to kick it off. So, Wade, do you want to set in? So I'd like to introduce our opening keynote. Ann Guevara is presently... Yeah. Oh, Varghese, I'm sorry. Before Ann, I'd like to introduce our Vice Dean for the School of Management, Varghese Jacob. He'd just like to welcome you guys. I'm sorry. Come on in. I'm used to Jim doing this part.
Oh, that's okay. We've already done the raises, so you're okay. I guess the dean normally is here. Unfortunately, he couldn't come. He never misses an opportunity to talk to a captive audience. So you know he's tied up elsewhere. And so it's felt to me, I guess, to welcome all of you. And I'm glad to be here. So welcome. I know you have a packed schedule, so I won't take too much of your time. But I did notice the title on that, the theme for the conference was Disruptive Leadership and Disruption. Thought it was interesting, so spent a couple of minutes last night thinking about the academic world and us, for example, to think about what have we done to be disruptive. And it just occurred to me that we've been extremely disruptive as far as the academic world is being concerned. Many of you may not know this, but we are a substantially, relatively very young school. We've probably been in existence about a little over 40 years. And in academia, that's like a newbie to a certain extent. And the nice thing in these short 40 years, we have accomplished a lot. Although, I may be a little biased in my opinion here, but when you look at what we've done, when you think of a business school, what do you think of first? MBA, right? Every school, business school has an MBA. But think of a young school trying to establish an MBA program and trying to attract students. Have we been successful? Yes, we've been successful. We have our MBA program is ranked in the top 30, if you will, which was accomplished, again, in a very short time. But by the same token, competing in the MBA world is not going to be, in terms of enrollments, is not going to be this uphill battle to a certain extent. So if you look at our website, you will notice that we have one of the most vibrant master's programs. We have approximately 13 different master's programs. If you look at our undergraduate programs, we have approximately 9 different undergraduate programs providing specializations in different areas. And our enrollments from approximately 3,000 in 20 years ago, we are about 9,500 students enrolled now. And we are sort of the largest school on campus. So I thought this theme of disruption seemed like a nice theme for us, and I thought you started off for our keynote speaker by giving you an example of how we've tried to accomplish this disruption. And I think we've reasonably been successful. And of course, we have all these specialized programs in the Executive Center, also like project management, healthcare management, all extremely successful. So, having said that, I'm going to sit down. I've done my job of selling our school, if you will, a little bit. And also, I should say, you're probably the first group to inaugurate this building. You know, I think this is the first event that is being held here, the major event. And interestingly, if you notice the name outside, Davidson Gandhi, they are alumni from the Jindal School. So we are quite proud to have their name on the alumni center. They are our alumni, so, you know. So having said that, welcome again. And I will hand it over to Debbie.
Thank you. Now I would like to introduce our opening keynote. Ann Guevara is presently the director of the Maritime and Littoral Systems portfolio in Raytheon Space and Airborne Systems, where she manages $300 million of development, production, and sustainment and support activities. Ann is a 20-year veteran of Raytheon and has managed a large variety of complex manufacturing and program leadership challenges, including 2 assignments as an expat, as part of an international joint venture where she managed a large complex software development initiative with over 14 million lines of code. She is a Raytheon certified program manager as well as a Raytheon Six Sigma Black Belt and was awarded the distinction of Program Manager of the Year in 2015. In addition to her Raytheon career, Ann is a retired colonel of the U.S. Army with over 25 years of experience leading tactical and domestic healthcare operations at home and abroad. I'd like to introduce Ann.
Don't let that rain dampen your energy. Debbie, thank you for the kind introduction and to the university for inviting me to share some reflections with you. It's very, very exciting to be here on a number of dimensions, to be back on campus. I am a Columbia graduate, so UTD is one of my alma maters. I've been back on campus in quite a few years, and so it's really, really exciting to see how the School of Management has grown and how the campus physical plant has grown. So just delighted to be here. As Debbie mentioned, I'm presently with Raytheon. I manage a portfolio of EOIR systems, electro-optical infrared sensors, that we put on a variety of platforms for primarily the Navy and the Marine Corps. As a testament to Raytheon's commitment to diversity, they've got an Army chick managing Navy programs. How about that? For the last 10 years, I've managed predominantly Air Force and Navy programs, so maybe that's kind of an essence of disruptive leadership in and of itself. I don't know. I understand we probably have a lot of TIers in the crowd. So technically, I'm a former TIer, only about 18 months. I transitioned mid-career. I left active duty as a company grade officer right before I had pinned field grade. TI recruited me into their manufacturing operations leadership program, and as they say, the rest is history. When the university approached me and asked me to join you all and talk a little bit about disruptive leadership, I have to admit I paused and said, why me? And then I said, disruptive leadership. Man, I've been involved in disruptive leadership for years, long before it was a catchphrase. So it is with kind of that suite of experience, both my time on active duty, having been recalled to serve in not only the first Gulf War, but the second Gulf War, and then my experiences at Raytheon. A wise man told me a long time ago, we are, each one of us, the sum total of our life experiences. So in the next 55 minutes or so, I'll try to share just a few of those with you in this context of what the heck is this thing, disruptive leadership, and how do we play a part? So I start my reflections with something that's a bit obtuse and orthogonal, but I thought to myself, what if somebody like Steve Jobs and Mother Teresa and a lowly old humble American program manager in Paris all walk into a bistro? What could they possibly have in common? I loved the opening remarks when you talked about disruptive leadership in academia. and it reinforces one of my theses, and that is disruption and innovation are all around us. The essence, though, is in the word leadership and what we do to drive or lead that change, albeit disruptive, but in a manner that yields compelling results. Now, certainly the lowly old humble program manager in Paris can't hold a candle to literally the saint Mother Teresa or the entrepreneurial icon of Steve Jobs. But all three had visions for excellence. You know, Steve set out to revolutionize he crafted the digital age. You know, he envisioned things that we now use today. How many people are carrying an iPhone? How many people have more than one iDevice on their person? Yes, 3 in my bag, right? So he influenced our entire world, and not just us as domestic Americans, but all over the world. Mother Teresa had a very noble purpose. It was simple. It had nothing to do with entrepreneurialism. She wanted to feed the world. Sounds simple enough, but she had a vision, a compelling vision that caused change, not only change on a micro scale, but change on a macro scale. So I take some inspiration from them, and I'll try to tie through some of their quips as I tell my story about what the heck is being an American program manager in Paris all about. So as Debbie alluded in her opening remarks, I did have the pleasure of being expatriated on behalf of Raytheon. Raytheon tapped me on the shoulder, not once, but twice, asked me to go abroad and manage a large, complex program. So I was remiss by PMI standards, and I didn't title this chart Learning Objectives, but these are the things that I'm going to talk to you about, and they are akin to learning objectives as I reflect on what does it take to manage complexity and to lead large-scale innovative change in today's global economy. So I'm going to talk about noble purpose. What is that, at least in Ann's world? Why is it important? I'm going to talk about what's called the Platinum Rule. Anybody heard of the Platinum Rule? Yes. Okay, so you can do that block of instruction. I'm going to remind us about the importance of knowing yourself, and I'll share with you some perhaps embarrassing, but moments of truth that I have experienced over time, both in the military and then when I was expatriated on behalf of Raytheon. I'll remind about the importance of understanding who's who, especially in the global economy. Things are not the same as when we are managing domestically, and our sales channels are not always linear. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then I'll leave us with, I'll have a surprise at the end, but the last learning objective is an admonishment or an encouragement to be bold and brave as you envision your new world order or your innovative change. Be bold and brave. Commit to your innovation, but don't be stupid. Don't go it alone, and don't be stupid. So I have a bunch of red numbers on the screen, and I'll talk to those momentarily, but first a few words on noble purpose. Certainly, the nobility of a saint like Mother Teresa couldn't or shouldn't be questioned. She had a simple humanitarian goal. Her noble purpose was feed the hungry, right? It's hard to hold a candle to that. But I would argue that we have nobility at all echelons all over the world, and sometimes those noble purposes or those visions manifest themselves in academia, in the marketplace, at home, with our children and spouses. And my wish for us is when we think about, I've got this great idea and I want to go lead innovation, make sure that you can focus, you yourself and your teams, can focus on the nobility of your purpose. It's kind of like having a problem statement, right? If everyone is not aligned around the problem statement, you've got people going all over yonder, and then you end up herding cats. So when we think about disruptive leadership, have a focus, preferably with laser light, that you can use to motivate yourself and align on. Oftentimes, when we think about disruptive leadership, at least when I do, it's akin to large complex challenges. right? Be it feeding the hungry, be it revolutionizing the digital age. In my case, these red numbers talk to that little old program in Paris, France that Raytheon asked me to go over and lead. This is the air command and control system for NATO. Air command and control is kind of like air traffic control. You know, when you get on a civilian aircraft, somebody that you can't see is managing the airspace to make sure planes don't run into each other, right? Sorry if there's any ATF people around here. I thought that's a very simplistic explanation. Well, for the military, an air command and control system includes both directing traffic in the skies, but it also adds what we call offensive and defensive capabilities. If bad guys try to come into the airspace, we prevent them. And if something should happen where there's an interdiction, we're able to take measures. So the red numbers talk to the complexity of this challenge that I was asked to go lead on behalf of Raytheon. The Air Command and Control System was a project of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It was designed to blanket the NATO airspace with traffic control, including offensive and defensive capabilities. 18 years refers to the time that the program was in capture phase, when the marketeers and the business developers were working with the NATO stakeholders to shape this program. I was asked to join long after the contract was awarded and the program was already in trouble. When I joined, the contract was 8 years delinquent to its expected delivery date, and it was significantly over cost. And you must be thinking, she's a dumb bunny. Why would she ever go and try to help out with this, right? I do love a challenge. So it was a long time in coming. There were high expectations. There was a noble purpose, right? All of the NATO contributing countries needed this capability to blanket their airspace and help command and control all of the air activity in that airspace. 14 million talks to the number of lines of code in this giant piece of software. Any software professionals in the room? A few. So you know, this is like big honkin' piece of code, right? Or piece of software. 22,000 refers to the number of PTRs or problem trouble reports or STRs, software trouble reports that were found in the software at the time that I first arrived in 2007 to manage the program or get it recovered. So you kind of get the picture, right? During my first time I was there about 18 months, the second time about 2.5 years. But when I first got there, we were writing off 10 to 20 million euro every quarter. That's how much over budget the program was. So if you don't know stress, that sort of challenge will give you a stress. But I go back to the noble purpose. Had there not been this compelling need, both on the part of NATO and on the part of the two parent companies to make good on our commitment, it would have been really hard to withstand the difficulties and the challenges faced on a program like this. The other numbers at the bottom, for those who are interested, if you deal in A2C2 or sensors, the system was designed to blanket about 10 million kilometers worth of airspace, 300 different sensor sites, 40 different radar types, 550 unique interfaces, and over 6,500 physical interfaces to make this all work. So big honkin' deal, right? So it reinforces my thesis of when facing complexity and when you have a big challenge, whether you're innovating something new or trying to make good on something that's already in play, it really helps to have laser-like focus and be able to align on what that mission is. And there's a quote here from Steve. You know, half of what separates the successful entrepreneurs from the non-successful ones is perseverance, right? So it's not for the faint of heart. The second learning objective is a focus on the platinum rule. Those of you in the audience that are probably about my age or maybe a little bit older might remember when we were youngsters, like in kindergarten, we got told the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do to you, right? Am I the only one that got taught that? Golden rule, right? The platinum rule is orthogonal to the golden rule. And the platinum rule says, do unto others as they would have done to them. Think about that a minute. So when facing complexity or trying to drive innovative solutions or disrupting the status quo, an approach is do it in a way, not that's necessarily good for you, but do it in a way that recognizes the communication style, the cultures, the mores of the community that you're trying to influence change in. So treat others as they want to be treated, not so much how you are comfortable being treated. And this is corollary to this notion of cultural intelligence. We'll talk more about that in a moment. In fact, we'll talk more about that now. How about that? So how many of you have had cultural awareness training? Anybody? And we probably teach that in the School of Management. I went through some cultural awareness training along the years. Nowadays, or at least for me, there's a pivot from merely being culturally aware, which says I have a familiarity with another culture, another geography, another space, to being intelligent about that other culture and adept at or capable of functioning in that other cultural space. So cultural awareness is definitely very, very important, but to drive large-scale change or even teeny tiny change in the global market, it's most effective if we practice cultural intelligence, which bridges this notion of I'm aware of the other person's mores, practices, language, style, and I have figured out a way to navigate or become capable given those cultural mores. Make sense? So cultural intelligence, I pulled a quote from Steve Covey that says, our strength lies in our differences, not so much in our similarities. And that really spoke to me. I joked in the beginning about Raytheon's commitment to diversity. Please don't go report me to my CEO. Raytheon really does have a commitment to diversity, right? Why else would they have an Army chick, managing Air Force and Navy programs, right? But especially when we're driving innovation, disrupting the status quo, bringing to bear change, or driving solutions out of complexity in ways never before heard of, it really, really benefits us when we open our aperture and we look at all the differences around us, because that helps us to influence our solution space. And it's that broad solution space, it's in that broad solution space where much innovation lies. So be culturally intelligent. Before I get off the notion of cultural intelligence and biases and perceptions, I found this picture the other night when I was prepping, and I thought it was quite interesting. I thought I would share it. I should have shown it without the labels. But what do you think of, or what do you see when you look at the back of a person's head that is clean shaven? Do you think of neo-Nazi white supremacists in Charlottesville, Virginia, causing riots? Do you think of a soldier who has just deployed to a foreign land? Do you think of your nephew who has cancer and just finished his last round of radiation and chemotherapy? What do you think of? Don't answer out loud. Doesn't really matter. I mean, it does. But the key point is we all have biases and perceptions and limitations. And it's not that those biases and perceptions and limitations are necessarily wrong. They're yours to own. The key message is be aware that biases, limitations, and perceptions exist, especially as you go forward to be more and more culturally intelligent, depending about the community or the project that you're working in. It's kind of like for a self-check, which takes us to the next of our learning objectives, which is know thyself. I can't stress how important it is when undertaking these large-scale innovation challenges to really, really be centered and know your own self. Before we began this morning, one of the PMI volunteers was chatting with me, and she asked, what was the hardest thing about going to France and living in France and managing such a large, complex program? And it caused me pause, because there are so many examples of what was challenging. But what I told her was, it really came down to this. When I was first asked to take on the challenge, of course I was flattered. Wow, that's a big girl job, and the company wants me to go do this? Why me, right? So I was flattered. I quickly got over my flattery and had to tighten up my bootstraps and be ready to go face the challenge. And I thought to myself, at the time I wasn't a full colonel, I was a lieutenant colonel in the US Army Reserve. I had already been recalled to the first Gulf War, the second Gulf War. I had made it home from Iraq. I had been a cancer survivor myself, so I thought, how hard can this be? I got this, right? I did not got this, right? I went with laser-light focus on the noble purpose. I understood the platinum rule and was prepared to practice the platinum rule. But I really wasn't at the level of cultural intelligence that I now know I needed to be at, and it was a challenge. My very presence on this large, complex program, or the very invitation for me to go assist this very large, complex program, was disruptive leadership at its finest. So even though I thought I was a special gal at Raytheon, and my company leadership had full faith, trust, and confidence in me, the selection to have me go manage this program was at the request of the French CEO. I neglected to comment, this project was part of a joint venture, the American company Raytheon and the French company Thales. So it was the French CEO who invited me and vetted me and finally selected me. And I was sure that I was not going to get the gig. Please. I had done my research on the company. I had done my research on the leadership team. There were no women on the leadership team. This was 2007. It wasn't exactly at the start of the Iraq War, but tensions were still high. And it was well understood that the French had not supported the United States in our operations in that part of the world. And so I figured there's no way they're going to pick a woman, much less an Army chick, to go be part of this leadership team and drive this complex program. And I could not have been more wrong. The CEO, Michel Mathieu, he understood disruptive leadership. And when I had my one-on-one with him, I asked him, why do you want me? What about my skills, abilities, and background appeals to you and gives you confidence that we can right this ship? And he said, I have hundreds of young female software engineers, and they have no gender equal leadership on the leadership team, and I want that. Okay, I guess that's all right. And he said, your experience in the military and the rigor and discipline that you bring to project leadership is what we need to correct that egregious situation. So he understood that he needed to disrupt his status quo with some compelling leadership tools that would help to right the ship. So many know thyself experiences that I had over the years, recognizing or revisiting in my own self, where do my strengths and abilities lie? But where are my gaps? What biases and assumptions do I bring with me that I might need to manage in a special way, or to which I might need to get some help so that I can be effective in that global change? So rest assured, some of the complexity and innovative challenge, leading wholesale change like Steve did, revolutionizing the digital age, or like Mother Teresa did, feeding the world and eliminating hunger, some of that is not for the faint of heart. But for those who know themselves and are willing to recognize and be transparent about their limitations and then build a network of enablers, it can be a profoundly rewarding experience. So know yourself, don't go it alone, recognize that our prowess as project managers, that is necessary but not sufficient. It takes a bit more. The next learning objective is what I call who's who. I don't know how many of you have exposure or experience in the aerospace defense industry. I'm sure you represent a myriad of commercial and other industries, including academia. But at least in aerospace, when we think about kind of sales channels, we think about what we call our acquisition customer, the person that gives me a contract to buy my goods and services. And then we think about over here, the end user, the fine men and women in uniform that are using our goods and services. And in the middle, we have something we call a combatant commander or a requirements generator. They're the ones who know what needs to be done and what goods and services those users are going to want. So it's very linear. I would submit in the global marketplace, especially in today's day and age, we live in an asymmetric market, right? It is not linear. And it's really, really important, depending on what innovation challenge or what status quo you intend to disrupt, it's really, really important to understand who's who. Doing your stakeholder mapping or your stakeholder analysis, understanding who the players are, even the ones who you may not immediately recognize as being influential to your project. I'll do a little build out here very quickly just to illustrate. I mentioned the large complex program that I was managing in France was part of a joint venture. The first time I got there were about 550 French or other nationalities on the program and 32 American expats. So I was very much in the minority. The project was, as I mentioned, at the bequest of the NATO, bequest of NATO. So my purchasing customer was that first kind of blue box you see with the shield up at the top. They're the ones who gave me the contract initially for the development effort. Over to the side that you see 4 little flags, those were the validation nations. So my big program had actually 5 contracts. I was to develop the system, and then for each of 4 countries, Italy, France, Spain, and Germany, I was to integrate the system at those national sites and interface with their host country radars. So 5 contracts. So you would think, that's all I need to worry about. Just talk to those 5 people, easy peasy, right? Not so much. I'm going to build this out, and I won't describe all of the different agencies. Anybody in the room worked NATO before or been assigned to NATO? Not so much. It's very, very, very complex. Now, you could argue the same thing is true about our own US Department of Defense or our US government. One of the differences, we have, believe it or not, we have a lot of transparency in the United States. We can go to a congressional record and look through the books and find out what a budget number is for a particular program. At NATO, not so much, and less so for some of our other global customers. So this was my spaghetti diagram, the org chart that I had to navigate through to get things done. So I needed to interface, myself personally or my staff, with many of these different agencies. And the pièce de résistance is at the top, where you see the flags of all the NATO countries. Now this chart is a little bit old, but nowadays there are 28 stakeholder nations that get voting rights for NATO. So for those of you who are software professionals or any kind of engineering professional, you know what it's like when you are working on a project and you decide a change needs to be made, and what we refer to as an engineering change proposal, right? So to get an ECP or engineering change proposal approved on my 14 million lines of code, I had to have a yes vote from all of those flags at the top of the chart. So rewind my learning objectives. That's why it helps to have a noble purpose. And understand the platinum rule and who you need to talk to about what. But it took me literally months to figure out who was who in this spaghetti diagram. And there are several of the agencies embedded here who didn't have a direct line to my project, but I quickly learned, because I practiced good cultural intelligence, I quickly learned who was who had whisper authority, which is not the same thing as budgetary authority, but it's who is influencing the situation and the outcome. And overlay on that, for those who aren't aware, the people who comprise NATO are from all of those 28 different countries. So it was incumbent upon me to not only learn how to function effectively in an embedded French culture, but then get at least smart enough about all of the other cultures represented by the NATO contingencies so that I knew when I had to modify my communication and leadership style using the Platinum Rule based on if I was dealing with my Italian counterparts, my Turkish counterparts, my Greek counterparts, or my own French team. Have I scared you off yet? There's a light at the end of the tunnel. So I bring us to my encouragement, or I don't want to say admonishment, it's a little bit of an admonishment. Don't be dumb when you're undertaking these large-scale challenges. Do be bold. Do be brave. Good things happen to those who drive for it. What was one of the earlier quotes about persistence? You have to be persistent when you are influencing change on a large or a small scale. We've probably all been in situations where we wanted something and the rest of the group didn't want that thing, right? Come on, admit it. Family, school, soccer field, the football coach or the football referee, and of course in our workplace, right? It requires a commitment and a passion to that noble purpose, and then you have to have the tenacity to see it through. So be willing to put skin in the game. You can't just direct traffic and expect other people to drive your noble purpose for you, right? You have to live and breathe the commitment and the passion to making it happen. I like to say sometimes you got to make a little noise, right? My caution is make that noise in culturally appropriate ways. Funny story, I have a lot of funny / embarrassing stories from my time in France. And one of them has to do with my journey personally to understanding how to interface with the French. I was so concerned about not appearing to be that American, that ugly, boisterous, loud American, that I was trying to be very, very suave and polite and all of those things so that I didn't upset the apple cart because I had a noble purpose and I was dead set on influencing change. And I was there a couple of months and I was having a particular problem getting performance out of the team, right? No offense to any francophones or native French persons in the audience, but you know, Americans are stereotypically looked at as brusque, and we've got to always be on time, and we hold time as more important than relationships. The French, stereotypically, the inverse. Relationships are more important than timeliness. And so you can imagine if you're managing a large complex program that's writing off 10 to 20 million euro per quarter, you don't have a lot of time to invest in relationship building. You got to get the project back on track. Did I mention that my IMS was 42,000 lines long? Incredible, right? So it was very important that I get us to some measures of success and do so quickly. Kind of hard to do when you call a meeting and everybody comes to the meeting 23 minutes late, 35 minutes late, etc. This went on for a while, and I finally had to pull my French battle buddy. I developed an allegiance with one of my French counterparts, and he was kind of my cultural coach and my cultural advisor. And I would ask him for what are some different ways that I can interact or I can message with the French team. And he told me, they need to see you yell and they need to see you scream. And I said, really? Well, I am an Army chick and I can kick A and take names with the best of them, but I thought that wasn't so cool in this environment. And he said, well, they don't want to see you do that all the time, but they need to know that you mean business. And you've been too patient for too long. And I said, okay, game on. So the very next scheduled status meeting, people started walking in late. I made a scene, took my notebook, threw it on the table, pounded my fist. It was quite the show. said some superlative expletives in French that my French coach had taught me, and everybody oh, their eyes got big. And guess what? They were never late for a scheduled status meeting again. How about that? Yay! I wouldn't have known to do that. I was holding back, right? I was trying to be bold and brave, but I was afraid of being stupid, but I was still looking at the problem through my American eyes. I had to look at it I had to apply the platinum rule every single day. I had to look at it through the eyes of my French colleague. So there you go. So make some noise. Don't be afraid to make some noise. But you might want a safety net or a network of helpers, both at home and abroad, to help you navigate what's the best way for me to make some noise to influence outcomes. You know, we talk about disruptive leadership, and I can't emphasize how important it is to keep those two words together. Because without the leadership aspect, guess what? Right? You're just one of those that's inducing chaos and inducing disruption. Causing the disruption or the chaos is the easy part, right? Lots of people do that. It's connecting that with leadership to drive through to the change. That's where the pièce de résistance is. That's where the glory is. So, exponential change is upon us. We've all lived through it. How many took an Uber to get here today? Anybody? Taken an Uber in the last week? Am I the only one? A few, yes. So think about this. Uber, it's considered, at least by this one author, the quote I pulled, it's considered the world's largest taxi cab company, yet they own no vehicles. Who would have thought of that 10 years ago or 15 years ago? Airbnb is considered the world's largest accommodation provider, and they don't own any real estate. Both of those are software initiatives. Go figure. Just like your app, Debbie, I was so excited to see the app and the innovations there. Cool, right? How much time and paper is that saving us, right? Real-time feedback. Autonomous cars, this one I'm scratching my head about. I've read a lot of articles lately and seen some news releases in Europe and Asia about the innovation of autonomous vehicles and autonomous transportation, and it's probably a function of my age. I'm like sticking my neck out going, I don't know if I'm down with that yet. But they say that change is upon us. What will our world be like for our children or our grandchildren where, you know, just like you call up an Uber, you call up autonomous transportation to move you around and you don't own a car anymore? Go figure, right? And 3D printers. Anybody working in additive manufacturing? Not so much. So this is another one. The price of 3D printers has come down just exponentially. It's incredible. And yet their capability is increasing, you know, in inverse proportions, I guess, to the price reductions, which is pretty fascinating. And these are just a few examples of the kind of innovative change that's upon us. So I would submit, it's all around us. You probably, I hope, by my few meager words, your wheels are spinning about change in your own world, in your families, in your marketplace, in your business area, in your academia. What can we do differently? What is that next frontier of innovative change that we can participate in? Hopefully we can lead. In the words of, who is it that said it, Patton? Lead, follow, or get out of the way, right? So disruptive leadership and exponential change is upon us. It's ours if we want it. I would submit that there's a few key ingredients to leading that kind of disruption that you want to keep in mind. I'll get ready to wrap it up with a shameless advertisement here. This is not me, obviously. It's not my daughter either, but my daughter's name is on the marquee. The model is wearing a bikini that was designed by one of my daughters. I have 3 very talented kids. 2 are chefs, and 1 is a starving architect who dabbles in all kind of adjacent market entrepreneurial opportunities. So Francie is my daughter. She designed this bikini. She did a 3D scan of the model. So the model stepped into what's like a dressing room, and the scanners scanned her body. Yes, Mama had to be the prototype. It was really embarrassing. But bear with my story. So the model steps into Francie's booth, and the scanners digitize her body, passes like, I don't know, 4,700 measurements for her body, for her entire body scan to the computer. Francie designs the bikini, sends the design to a 3D printer. The model was featured on the runway during Fashion Week in New York City, modeling a 3D printed garment. How cool is that? So in our lifetime, in our children's lifetime, can we imagine, sorry if there's any shareholders for Walmart, Macy's, or JCPenney in the room, sorry for what I'm about to say, but can you imagine a world where ready-to-wear has been transformed into designed-to-wear, where all of us have our body scanned, for me on a regularly recurring basis, up and down and up and down, but have our body scanned, and then when you want a new suit or a new blouse, or for those who are able, a bikini, right? When you want that garment, your measurements are sent to the producer who has a 3D printer, who is able to push all different types of materials through the garment. Or even if the notion of the 3D printed garment is too far-fetched for some of us to think about, what about they scan us, they push our measurements, the designer then in 24 hours fabricates the garment in the suit color you want, in the blouse color you want, etc. How about that? What does that do to our supply chain? What does that do to the whole notion of ready-to-wear and our brick-and-mortar garment industry? So I give credit to all of us, but especially this younger generation of entrepreneurs that they can see things I certainly never would have thought of, right? The innovative change is upon us. That's what I call disruptive leadership. It's ours if we want it, but to lead through that change requires some tenets or some principles, not the least of which is that tenacity. So I'll leave you with this. So I told you a lot about my large complex program in Paris. It was a huge challenge. Many said it could never be done. Certainly we never recovered the financial investment, but on the part of NATO and on the part of the two companies, the French company Thales, the American company Raytheon, there was absolute commitment to the noble purpose. It was an imperative for the safety of NATO that this system get fielded. And I don't know if you could see the little print, but in July of 2015, the press release announced that 3 weeks prior in June, the first ATF flight of a Eurofighter Typhoon was managed from the Air Command and Control Center in Poggio Renautico, Italy, and tracked to Spain. So the ACTS system finally went operational. Thank the Lord. So good things can happen when you have the commitment and the passion and the drive for that noble purpose. It helps that you're well-resourced to make that kind of change. Not all change is on the scale of Mother Teresa and Steve Jobs, but innovation happens all around us. I would encourage you to continue to practice the prowess of your project management profession. What we do is cool stuff. It's really cool stuff, and it makes the world go round. And don't be afraid when the landscape looks daunting, because I would submit if you have that noble purpose and you understand your own self and you surround yourself with a network of enablers, you can do great things. So I'll leave you with that, and I'll close with one final note from Steve that really speaks passionately to me, and I believe this in my personal and professional life. If we have not had the opportunity to experience a lot of diversity or a lot of different things, by our very nature, our solution space is very small. The aperture closes. And so anytime we can reach outside of ourselves, and it doesn't mean moving across the world to manage a large, complex A2C2 program, but just going to a different grocery, eating at a different restaurant, engaging a person of a different culture and asking them, where did you go to school? What kind of, what was it like? What kind of games did you play? What kind of food do you like, etc. All of those little things help us to open our aperture and add richness to our toolkit and our diversity of experience. And that diversity of experience allows us to have a broader solution set. I can assure you, when I was first asked to go to France, if I hadn't done half of the things I had done, both in the military and at Raytheon up until that time, much less been the cancer survivor or been deployed and all of that, I wouldn't have had near the confidence that I did have to say, I think I can do this, right? So I would encourage you to actively seek out that diversity of experience. It will help you to broaden your solution space, and that's a powerful, powerful tool when you're leading large complex change or when you're leading disruptive change. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions or if you have any comments. Sir.
How was language? I've been French too and NATO, so is everything in English or French or translators, or how did the whole thing work together?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. I should have commented on that. So officially, my contract was in 2 languages, English and French. The business practice is that you conduct business in English. That's the practice. However, given that I was part of a joint venture that was 90-some-odd% French, even though our leadership team meetings were conducted in English, when the going got rough and there were very, very difficult discussions, they always broke into French. I am not a Francophone. I had taken high school French before I was asked to go over. And so I quickly had to, I'm still not fluent in French, so I don't want to give anybody the wrong impression. I can practice my French with you. Je ne parle pas de français très bien, mais je parle un petit peu. I just speak a little bit of French. But it was imperative that I at least demonstrate a willingness and a commitment to try. It became very, very effective when, like I said, when the going got rough and there were very, very tense discussions, where I could listen in and understand the nature of the conversations. My vocabulary is rather limited, so I wasn't always able to reply in French, but oftentimes I would reply in English, and that earned me so many points with my French colleagues because they saw that I wasn't being that dumb American that was just trying to do things American ways. I was really trying to lean in. The other area that the language, I'll say barriers or nuances were quite complex, was when we were dealing with our NATO customers and the contingent at NATO, because you're in a simple meeting like this. I could not speak I should not be speaking nearly as fast as I am right now. I did have to speak very, very slowly. My remarks always had to be scripted and provided to my NATO contingents 24 hours in advance so that they could either do prior translation or they would often have a dual screen so that they would see the English and their native language at the same time. A funny story though, this was in my earlier days before I was practicing my cultural intelligence and platinum rule very well. One of my first kind of administrative responsibilities when I got there was resetting some of the details of the contract and providing reports and whatnot. And I knew that the contract was bifurcated or a bilingual contract, French and English. So I was editing various contract documents in English. And I submitted these to NATO, and they quickly got rejected. Do you know why they got rejected? The contract was written in the Queen's English, not American English. For those of you who don't know, there is a difference. I spent hours and hours respelling the word program because I had insisted they had spelt it wrong. It was written in the Queen's English. It was right. I was the dummy. NATO had a good laugh about that, right? So that's just another more anecdotal than anything, but gosh, I wish I hadn't been so dumb. I wish somebody had pointed that out to me. And when I pulled the very, very original contract, mind you, this program had started years prior. When I pulled the very, very original statement of work, sure enough, British English, what a dummy I was. But you learn from those kind of things. Other questions, sir?
I was just curious, this was back in 2007, 2008. So here we are 10 years later with lots of new tools, apps, and all that kind of thing. Do you think you could have done your job from the States? Did you have to physically, in today's age, would you have to be physically?
That's a very good question. And I would say yes and no. I should have explained that part of the joint venture, it was a American and French effort. Not all of my software developers were in France. I had a contingent of developers and program managers that were in El Segundo, or vicinity El Segundo, California. And they were designing all of the non-real-time portion of the system. My real-time developers were in France with me. Could I have done it remotely? On this program, I would say no. And the reason I would say no is because of relationship building and because the program was already in such distress. It required presence front and center, not only with the French contingent, but with all of NATO, to ensure that the right things were being done and to make sure that we were protecting Raytheon's interests. Now, that said, do I think today we can do more across time zones? Absolutely. I had people across 7 time zones during this era. I wasn't physically in all of those time zones, right? But I think initially, if you don't have the relationships already established, being present is very, very important. Once you have relationships established, yes, I believe we can do great things managing virtually. I don't think, I'll just speak for my own little portfolio, my $300 million worth of EOIR sensors. I have a hard time getting my guys to go from A wing in McKinney to D wing in McKinney. And I'm like, really? You guys were in the same time zone, in the same building, right? Use the virtual tools, right? That's how we're going to speed up the progress of change, right? So it can be done. Are we all adept at it? Not so much. Not so much. Other questions? Over here?
What type of project management methodology you used at that time, and if you reuse that again, would you change it?
Oh, that's a good question. If I had to do it again, would I change it? So here's my reflection or my thought. Especially when you have a project like what I had that was already in existence, it was very, very important to me that I get the team back to basics, right? Cost, schedule, and technical performance are the 3 crown jewels. And quite frankly, at the time when I first took over, the team didn't have laser-like focus on all 3 of those, right? So I would not have changed that aspect. I would not, for a moment, have changed my laser-like focus on, I don't want to just talk about the cool innovations in software and the new data links and blah, blah, blah. A lot of us as engineers, we get enamored with, oh, here's the new shiny object and it's so cool. Well, that's interesting. But my obligation to my stakeholders is all 3 of those things: cost, schedule, technical performance. And at the time, I mentioned 8 years delinquent to contract, hundreds of millions of euro over budget, unacceptable, right? So much of my effort, the entire first 18 months, and then again when I went back, was the laser-like focus on those discipline metrics. The things I would have done differently were the nuances of how to introduce change to that culture. That's what I would have done differently. I learned some hard lessons the first few times because I wasn't as much of a practitioner of cultural intelligence as perhaps I am now. A funny story, Debbie mentioned that in addition to the other things I do, I am a 6 Sigma black belt, so improving things is in my nature, right? And we have the tool of 6 Sigma expertise to help us to do that. Well, the first time I tried to launch a 6 Sigma project with my French colleagues, oh la la, it was a disaster, horrible, it was terrible. I mean, it was really, really bad. I was speaking a foreign language, both literally and figuratively, right, about the 6 Sigma toolkit. They didn't know what the heck I was talking about, why are we bothering? And so I had to really step back and figure out how could I introduce this using language and tools that at least the French Thales corporate culture was very familiar with. And so then the joke was, Anne's doing that 6 Sigma thing by trickery, right? She's not telling us it's that 6 Sigma thing, right? But we were driving continuous improvement. So those are the kind of things that I would do differently. I would not have changed the laser-like focus on the 3 key measures, not at all. Sir?
And have you, in the last 10 years, have you perceived any difference in the acceptance of women in leadership positions?
Absolutely. I truly have. And I'm happy to see that a number of, I assume your question was with respect to the joint venture in France, or just in general?
As well, please.
Sure. So both. So definitely in France, some of the younger female software engineers and project managers during my time and since I left have risen to positions of higher responsibility. So that's a very good thing to see. Definitely in my own experience at Raytheon, you know, I can't speak highly enough about the opportunities that are available and that are being made available. I don't know about how the rest of the women in their industries, you know, what they would regard, but at least in my case, I'm increasingly optimistic and I'm increasingly sought upon to take on larger challenges. After my second tour of duty in France, I was asked to, it was time for me to repatriate. You know, there's a statute of limitations for tax purposes and that sort of thing. So I was asked to go to Rhode Island, where I had a portfolio of also sea power business that spread across Portsmouth, Rhode Island, Sudbury, Massachusetts, San Diego, and somewhere else, St. Petersburg, Florida. So I had a rather, to your question about can you manage remotely? Absolutely. So I had a portfolio that spanned many different states, and there was no question about my ability as a woman to be able to lead that portfolio. Thank you for your question. Any others? Ma'am? Yes?
So when you were talking about your status meetings, you talked about first how you had a certain personality that you thought they would like.
Right.
And then your cultural mentor said, I know this is what you need to do. Would your true personality have been just as good had you started day one as just being yourself?
So that's a good question. And I get that a lot. And when years ago I did a lot of reading and adopted what is referred to as situational leadership. So there is, what is my natural tendency? My natural tendency, quite frankly, I'm Sicilian by ethnicity, so my natural tendency is to rip people's heads off when they're not doing what I want them to do. To be just honest and transparent, okay? That's my natural tendency. My academia and my lifelong learning, my experiential learning tells me that's not always appropriate, right? Neither in the workplace, nor at home, not even with my soldiers when I was on active duty. What I tell my team now is, you know, even though what we do at Raytheon is super important and it's enabling the lives of our men and women who are in harm's way, the decisions I make on a daily basis in McKinney, Texas are not life and death decisions. When I was downrange in Iraq deploying new equipment to our docs and our medics all over the theater, I was having to make life and death decisions for me and my team, right? But most of what we do, unless you're in healthcare or a police officer or an EMT, most of what we do on a moment-by-moment basis is not a life or death decision. So with respect to situational leadership, when I'm in a life or death decision moment, the real Anne comes out, and it's very, very decisive, and it takes no prisoners, and we get the mission done. However, that style is not appropriate when we're not in situations that are life and death decisions. So it's not about betraying the real Anne, it's about modulating the real Anne and knowing when to apply what my daddy used to call my leadership gifts. I think he was being kind. He was trying to tell me, don't rip people's heads off when the situation doesn't warrant, right? So that said, when I first got to France, had I been a little bit more culturally intelligent, I think I still would have been very polite and observant initially because I was trying to assess the lay of the land. But I also believe I wouldn't have waited so long to bring out bad Anne when the situation warranted. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Very good. Other questions? Sir.
You speak of cultural intelligence, and there's also the concept of emotional intelligence.
Yes, sir.
Which I was kind of hearing some background pieces. Could you speak about how you see those two and how you relate to them?
Absolutely. Did I just hit something? Oh, there I am. So I'm glad you asked that. I didn't tease that out in this discussion, but my language probably betrayed me. I'm an avid reader and a humble practitioner of emotional intelligence protocols, tangents, and mores. So emotional intelligence says, I won't give the academic answer, so sorry for the academicians. You'll have to help me, right? But it's kind of the corollary to situational leadership, right? It says you have an appropriate emotional response, appropriate, whoever designs that, but you have an appropriate emotional response for any given situation. And you want to wisely engage with your emotions given the situation. And when I was a young pup, I went to some course on emotional intelligence, and it talked about you have a daily quotient. Imagine it said a quarter. This was years ago, so we'll call it $1. Let's say you have a budget of $1 worth of emotions that you can expend every day. That's it. And if you have family crises, if your mother is in the hospital, if you have kids that need homework done, if you have a crisis at work, right? You only have $1 worth of emotion. Positive emotions, negative emotions. Emotional intelligence would say you apply the right amount of emotion and the right type of emotion depending on the situation that you're in. So, when the French guys come in late to the status meeting, if I spend my entire dollar or my entire euro worth of emotion ripping their heads off, then I don't have any more emotion left, positive or negative, for my loved ones, right? And so the emotionally intelligent practitioner will make sure that they know themselves, they're practicing the platinum rule, they're assessing the situation that they're in, and they're behaving in a way that balances the right amount of emotion and the right type of emotion for the situation they're in. It is absolutely a corollary to cultural intelligence. Because if I understand the culture, and I'm already a practitioner of appropriate emotional intelligence, it makes it a lot easier for me to know when to speak up in those difficult situations or when to stay chill. I hope that helps. Thank you for the question. Others? Well, thank you again for having me join you today. It's been quite exciting to be here back on campus, and I hope a tidbit of my words might have sparked at least some thought for you, and I look forward to you having a rather enriching rest of the symposium.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.